Hello everyone and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. Today I'm gonna continue on the previous tutorial that I did yesterday. So what we're planning to do, for those of you who haven't watched that tutorial, I'll put a link down here. You can go ahead and check it out. But in general, we're trying to make this kind of user interface and experience where you have a bunch of pages or panels, if you will, and then you have this navigation down here, and by clicking on each of the navigation items, you go to that specific page, right? So yesterday I went ahead and created and showed you guys how to create these arrows, both using normal CSS and using SVG. And I talked about what are the advantages of having an SVG arrow rather than this one in our scenario right now. What I'm going to do, as always, going to Codity, creating a new prototype. I'm going to create a container div, and in the CSS, I'm going to style it a little bit, so giving it a width of 100 viewport width and a height of 100 viewport height, and let's just give it a background color of tomato for now, so you can see how it looks. We have a little bit of a margin on our body, so I'm gonna remove that by setting the margin to 0 on my body. Now we have a full page with our container in it. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to the tutorial prototype that I did yesterday, just copy the SVG down here, right? And in my container class, I am going to create a div with a class arrows, and this is pretty much to structure my HTML nicely, right? So you can go ahead and just paste those and go ahead, but here I'm kind of like categorizing the elements that I want to have in my HTML by putting them in a container. So I have my arrows container over here and pasting that SVG. I'm going to switch to this layout to have a better workspace here, aligning this. So I have an SVG, as you can see right here. I'm going to copy this again and paste it. So I have two, one for my left side and one for my right side, giving the SVGs a class arrow for both of them, actually, because I want to define some properties that they both share. And I'm going to give this one a class left and the second one a class right? So respectively for left and right. Now going back to this view so that we can actually see what we have over here, I'm going to go and create the arrow class, giving it maybe well, top 50%. Want to center it vertically down here, but obviously I need to define the position to be absolute, right? So now you can see that they both stacked up on top of each other because I defined the position absolute. And then I'm gonna go on my left arrow and define, like, because I need a rotation, because right now it's pointing towards this direction, I want it to point to the other direction. I'm gonna just define a transform, rotate, and give it a minus 180 degrees, right? So you can see it now points to the left, right? And I'm gonna give it a left of 10 pixel so that there is a bit of a margin, and then I will define my right one, right? So right one, it points to the right direction. I only need to define a left. So to be able to move it down here or right here, I'm going to define the calc function in CSS by giving it 100% of my width, but I will subtract it by, let's say, 80 pixel, right? So you can see it pretty much aligns over here. So in this tutorial, I'm gonna go one step further and actually try to make these arrows act in a very nice user experience fashion. what I'm going to do is that, let's say on my left arrow, when I go over it, so by the way, let's just scale both of these down a little bit. They seem to be a little bit big, right? So on my left arrow, I already have a transform, so I just add a scale, maybe 0.6. Yeah, looks better. And on my right arrow, there is no transform. There was no need to actually rotate it. It was pointing to the right direction. I'm going to define a transform, scale it to the same size of the left arrow. So we now have a little bit smaller. And then on my left arrow, when I hover on it, I want the transform scale to be maybe back to 1, or its original scale. So what happens is that if I hover on it, you can see that it gets to the original scale, which is 1, or original size. But the problem though is that it actually turns back. So what I need to do is on my left arrow, I actually define a rotate minus 180 degree. I'm just going to copy paste this on the hover transform as well. Now you can see that it actually works perfect. Now on my right arrow, which I'm going to do hover here on it. On the right arrow, the only transform that I have is scale, so I don't need any rotate. I'm going to do just transform scale 1, right? So now you can see that it actually works perfect, but as always, we need to add a little bit of an animation, not so much, but a little bit. So what I'm going to do, since we have defined a transform here on our hovers, I'm going to go to the arrow class where both of these SVG arrows share the properties. I'm going to define transition transform, because that's what we changed, and then define 0.3 seconds, right? Now if I hover, you can see that we have this nice sort of animation. Just a rule of thumb, when you're working on a desktop, make sure that the transition timing is actually somewhere between 0.2 and 0.4. Don't go more than that, don't go less than that, because if I make it really low, you see this transition is a little bit fast. It's as if there is no transition. And if I go a little bit more than that, you can see that it takes a little bit of time. Maybe you like it, but in general, the rule of thumb is that just have it over 0.2 to 0.4 seconds. I'm going to choose 0.3 seconds, right? So yeah, well, the first element is setup. What I would like to do, since I have my SVGs with the class arrow for both of those, I would prefer to have white rather than black, but that's very opinionated. I'm going to just say I want my arrow class to have a fill, because it's an SVG, a fill of white, right? Now we have white. The next thing that I want to do, switching back to this layout, in my container class, at the same level as I define my parent arrows, which is down here, I'm going to define a UL, or unordered list, and I will give it a class navigation, right? And then within that, I'm going to create maybe 4 LIs, right? Sort of resembling those circles that I had down here on the actual example that I showed earlier. So now what I'm going to do, knowing that I have added a class navigation on my UL, going back to my CSS, I would say my UL that has a class navigation, I want the list style to be none, because I wanted to get rid of all those bullet points here. Then my navigation, and basically why I'm adding this UL, so that anybody else who sees it knows that this navigation is actually on top of an unordered list item in my HTML, right? You could definitely just remove it and just type navigation. It's just for clarity. And then here, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to basically set the, let's put something in them, first of all, to show what happens. 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? Now going back to the CSS, I'm going to say display inline block. So what happens is that they actually align themselves horizontally, which is exactly what I want. And then to generate those the circles, I'm going to use the pseudo element on these LIs. So navigation LI before. So for each of those LIs, I add a pseudo element. I don't want any content here. I want the width to be maybe 10 pixel, height to be 10 pixel. Give it a background of white, and then the position to be absolute, and then well, top 0 and left 0. And obviously when I define a pseudo element that has a position absolute on the original element, I need to define position to be relative, right? So I want these pseudo elements to actually position themselves within my LI rather than the general page flow, right? And that's why I define the position on the parent or the original LI to be relative, right? I'm going to go ahead in my HTML removing those numbers. And now I know that I have my navigation UL over here. I'm just going to define the position here absolute. And by that, I'm going to define the top to be maybe 30, bottom, sorry, because I want to move it bottom of the page. I'm going to make it 30 pixel, so it's right here. And also, I'm going to define transition. Sorry, not transition, but I'm going to just use left 50%. So it's pretty much on the left 50%. And then I'm going to use transform translate on the x-axis minus 50% of its width. Right? So it kind of centers it in the center of the page. And what I need to do is, obviously this doesn't look good. I will give some padding. So padding left 10 pixel, and then padding right maybe on my LIs to be 10 pixel as well. Now we have this pretty much nice navigation icons. On my before, the only thing I need to add is border radius to make it 50%. And now we have our button, or the navigation sort of circles or buttons, or whatever you want to name it, right? The next part is that whenever I hover on top of these, I want them to become a little bit bigger, right? So I know that I have them in my LIs. So the parent of each of these is LIs. So what I'm going to do is that I will say on my LI, when I hover on it, but for the before pseudo elements of my LI. So again, my navigation LI when I hover on each of those, but I want to influence the before element because that's where I define my sort of circles. I'm going to say I want the transform scale to be maybe 1.4. Now what happens is that when I hover, you can see that these ones each get a little bit bigger, right? And I obviously want to have the same animation effect as I have on these ones. So what I'm going to do is that on the original before, I'm going to say transition transform, because I changed the transform property, and then I will use the same timing duration, which is 0.3. Now if you look at it, you can see that these circles, whenever you hover on it, gets bigger, right? And that's exactly what I want. The other part is that I will define the cursor on my LI to be pointer, so that you actually have this hand cursor, which looks pretty good. So if you don't mind, I'm going to add a little bit more padding in my LI so that these circles get a little bit more distance from each other. So I'm going to do, instead of maybe 10, I'm going to do 20 for now. It looks a little bit better. And again, the other thing is that obviously these navigations will, by clicking on them, it will show the respective page that we haven't yet added, but we will soon. So what I'm going to do is that I want to define whenever I click on this, it should show the sort of the second page, but also it should sort of indicate that we are on this sort of level, right? So I'm going to go in my HTML and let's say we are on the second page. Let's add class selected, right? And then in my CSS, whenever I define my LIs, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to say UL navigation and then on LI, but this time selected class, right? I'm going to scale that one to be 1.9, so something really big, right? So you can see that I have a bigger one, which is exactly what I want, meaning that I'm at the page 2 right now. But the problem though is that the alignment is a little bit not nice, and that's the reason why is that I actually define the transfer on the LI class itself. Rather, I should define it on the before. So whenever the LI class is selected, but it's before element, right? Now it adjusts itself pretty nice. The second problem right now is that we define this very nice sort of transition where all of these get bigger, but well, when the second page or each of these pages are selected, I don't want this transition to happen, right? I want it to be a big circle without any of these sort of scaling transitions. What I need to do is to modify this hover by saying that I want the LI, but not with the selected class, right? So I want the hover on top of the LIs, but not the one with the selected class, and then also I want it to apply to the before pseudo element of that LI, right? So now you can see that I have these animation transition on each of these, but not on the selected class, right? So maybe one more thing I wanted to add here is to add a box shadow on my circles. So box shadow to be, well, let's say 0 on x-axis, 0 on y-axis, 10 pixel for the radius of it, and then using RGBA to define the color 0, 0, 0 for black, and then opacity of 0.4, right? Now you can see that we have a little bit of a nice shadow in case one of the pages have a background of white, right? So otherwise, if I don't define this shadow, you will not see these navigation buttons down here when the background is white, right? So we're cool right now. The last thing in this tutorial that I want to show you is actually defining those actual panels, right? So going back the same level in the container where I have my arrow and my navigation on top here, I'm going to define a new class called panels, and then within that panels I'm going to define divs that have class panel. And since we have 4 items over here, I'm going to just copy and paste 4 of them. So we have 4, and then going back to our JS, I will define the panel to have the width of 100 viewpoint width and height of 100 viewpoint height. And I want the position to obviously be absolute because I want all of these pages to stack up on top of each other. And well, now to sort of maybe just top 0 and left 0 so that they start from top 0 and left 0. And then I'll give each of those 4 different color. So let's just start with the first child by using nth child selector here. First, I'm referring to the first panel over here. So let's just give it a background of gray, and then I will choose the second panel using nth child 2 and maybe give it a background color of tomato. Just copy this and go for the third one, give it a background color of maybe yellow green, and then the last one, which is number 4, I'm gonna give it a blue violet, right? So as you can see now, even though they're all positioned and stacked on top of them, the last one is dominating the page just because of the order that they have in our HTML. So this is the first one, obviously really back underneath, then the second one, the third one, and the fourth one. And the way I'm gonna, in the next tutorial, I'm gonna start working on the interactivity where, you know, by clicking each of these, the respective sort of page shows up, and also using these, it goes back and forth on those pages, and also reflecting on these. But the way I'm gonna handle the page selection is actually using z-index, right? So right now, if you notice, it sort of follows the order of them in this fashion when they're defined in HTML, but I can simply use a z-index on the first one by defining a z-index more than 0, so 1. Now you can see that the gray one is the dominant one, right? If I choose basically the second one, so you can see that the one that we have defined, tomato, is dominating. One thing you can notice is that all the navigations are gone right now. So in order to fix that, for the arrow class, I'm going to give it a z-index bigger than 1. Let's just give 10. And obviously for our navigation the same way, I'm going to give it a z-index of maybe 9. Now you can see that by changing the z-index on each of these, you're still going to see those navigation buttons, right? So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Stay tuned for the next tutorial, which we start doing the actual stuff by creating all sort of interactivity by clicking on these buttons and see what not happens here. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, go ahead and do to get notified for the next tutorials. And if you like this tutorial, please go ahead and share it and like it so that I can continue doing these kind of tutorials. And I wish you a very nice, happy day and night. Goodbye.